The poor fellow soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon, also known as the Order of the Solomon's Temple, the Knight Templars, or simply the Templars, were a Catholic military order founded in 1119. The Templars became a favored charity throughout Christianity and grew rapidly in membership and power. They were prominent in Christian finance. Templar Knights, in their distinctive white mantles with red cross, were among the most skilled fighting units of the Crusades. The Templars were closely tied to the Crusades. When the Holy Land was lost, support for the order faded. Rumors about the Templars' secret initiation ceremonies created distrust, and King Philip IV of France, deeply in debt to the order, took advantage of the distrust to destroy them and erase his debt. In 1307, he had many of the order's members in France arrested, tortured into giving false confessions, and burned at the stake. Pope Clement V disbanded the order in 1312 under pressure from King Philip. The abrupt reduction in power of a significant group in European society gave rise to the speculation, legend, and legacy through the ages. But who were the Knight Templars and what was the real purpose of this order? A while ago, while searching the origins of Freemasonry, authors Christopher Knight and Robert Lomas, on their book The Second Messiah, proposed a thesis where they found proof that the Templars' real objective was not to protect the Christians on their way to Jerusalem, but instead to excavate under the ruins of Herodes' temple with the purpose of finding documents and relics that were buried underneath back in the time when the Romans attacked and destroyed the city of Jerusalem and the temple built by Herodes back on the year 70. They say that based on the information left by historian Flavius Josephus, there were underneath the temple tunnels where Jews hid. J.M. Allegro, on his book The Treasure of the Copper Scroll, says that a document found in Qumran, also known as the Ascension of Moses, said that the kingdom of God would come after all humans and earth be erased, and that all Jews who fought this war were told to bury all their most sacred belongings and treasures close to the Sanctum Sanctorum, under the custody of God. Let's remember that the Sanctum Sanctorum was the holy chamber within the temple. Following these instructions, the Jews, left on despair, proceed to bury, as instructed, all the scrolls with sacred information, rituals, and their most precious belongings underneath the temple. When the city was on the verge of destruction by the Romans and Jews felt this was the moment they were waiting for, according to the Ascension of the Moses Scroll. The research goes on to say that the 9 French knights that offered their services to protect the Christians visiting Jerusalem to King Balduino II in the year 1118 instead spent the following 9 years exclusively in the excavation underneath the temple and were not involved in any activity where they seemed to be protecting pilgrims. In the year 1128, they were ascended to the category of Holy Order by the Pope. The main goal of these knights was to research and found the old scrolls with information of the actual old traditions from old Judaism coming from Egypt and the time of Moses himself. According to the research, these French individuals were descendants of a lineage of Jews that were able to escape and have knowledge of the information kept underneath the temple, and the goal was to find it. The lineage refers themselves as the Rex Dukes, or God Kings, and were composed of 2 distinctive lineages, one descendant of King David associated with the temple column called Boaz, and one descendant of the lineage of priesthood associated with the column of the temple called Hakim. Both columns are of highly significant on Masonic rituals. This theme about lineage reminds me of the story of Ruth, great-grandmother of King Solomon, who became a widow from his husband called Boaz, like the column associated to the lineage of King David. The story gives the name of the term son of the widow to everyone that descends from her lineage, which include King David and Solomon, and also is the name that Freemasons gives to themselves. Part of the occult speculation about Templars were their activities. They were often accused of having rituals, stepping on the cross, and worshipping a strange head skull image called Baphomet, which sadly is now associated to the devil. And when magician and Freemason Eliphas Levi made a symbolic representation of this figure using symbolism on his book Dogma and Ritual of High Magic, the figure shows the symbolism that represents the opposite sides of nature, as well as the masculine and feminine aspect. Let's keep in mind that the pentagram he used on the forehead points to the top, and for magicians this represents the spirit over the elements and the superiority of the soul over the material world. According to Hugh Schofield, who was one of the original researchers working on the Dead Sea Scrolls found at Qumran, and is the author of many books on biblical history, most notably the Passover Plot. While working on the Dead Sea Scrolls, Schofield noticed that Jewish used a cipher technique called Atbash, which he used to translate some of the words that were undetectable to the scholars. Schofield became very interested in the charges of heresy labeled against the Knight Templars, and particularly the etymology of the word Baphomet. It was decided by Schofield that he would apply the Atbash cipher, which he was convinced the Templars were aware of. If one writes the word Baphomet in Hebrew, and remember Hebrew letters read from right to left, the result reads as the Greek word Sophia, that translates into wisdom. Sophia also resembles a similar Greek word meaning knowledge, which is gnosis, and is written with the Greek letter gamma, and the equivalent of this letter in Hebrew is Gimel, which happens to be the third letter in Hebrew alphabet, letter G. A skull in present days is still part of some initiation rituals. Anyone seeing this without any type of context would assume that a head or skull also happens to be worshipped by that group. Speculation in regards to the order surrounding the circumstances involving the last year of their great-grand master named Jacques de Molay are very interesting. Not sure if you know, but the order to arrest the Templars took place on Friday the 13th, which is considered a day of bad luck, because Friday, October 13, 1307, King Philip IV of France ordered the arrest of the Knights Templar. They were arrested, many killed and tortured, and forced to confess to heretic acts. Sometimes later, Jacques de Molay, as he was about to be executed, appealed and said, "From this your heinous judgment to the living and true God who is in heaven," warning the Pope that within a year and a day, he and Philip IV would be obligated to answer for their crimes in God's presence. In the event, Philip and Clement both died within a year of Molay's execution, Clement finally succumbing to a long illness on the 20th of April of 1314, and Philip dying due to a stroke while hunting. This is depicted on the tarot deck that stands for death, which happens to be number 13, showing precisely the fate of both the Pope, Clement, and King Philip IV. This goes in line with some researchers that believe the tarot origin goes back to all civilizations, and Templars were able to find these cards as they were part of their rituals and transmitting a larger knowledge. Finally, on their book The Second Messiah, the authors believe and present proof that William Imbert, sometimes referred to as William of Paris, was the chief inquisitor of the French Inquisition, found a secret place where private ceremonies attended by only certain Templars night took place. The members of the Inquisition of Paris would have found a skull and two tied bones. They also would have found a white linen shroud. Knights and Lomas argue that Molay was nailed to a doorframe of this secret room, one hand directly upwards over his head and the other outstretched to his side. An object representing a crown of thorns was then thrust in his head. He would then be left for hours until just before the point of death. The two authors would run experiments with a similar covered body wrapped in the same way with a shroud, and when placing the body into a soft bed, results would match almost identically to the shroud, following a technique used replicating a photographic image via small light, where they believe the acids of the body sweat when evaporating, the temperature of the body after the beating contribute to the process. Carbon testing in 1988 would put the age of the linen cloth between 1,260 and 1,390, with an error margin of 60 years or so. That would fit perfectly around the dates of Demolay's torture in 1307, not to mention the uncanny likeness to the image we have of Demolay. Therefore, they concluded the image on the shroud is none other than the last Grand Master of the Templars, Jacques Demolay. So here we have an order surrounded by mystery knights, warriors, owners of a great secret. People do not understand secret rituals, and betrayed by a ruler who took the best of them and end up turning him as a symbol for the same authority that betrayed him and crushed the order. The fallen knight became the symbol, worship of the very same powers who then betrayed him and betrayed. So for ceremonial magical practitioners, it's hard to avoid in our journey to stumble into a figure as Solomon, whether it's through Goetia or Kabbalah, and its center point legend which refers to its temple. So talking about the temple, I believe, should be a must between occult fanatics. The temple itself, according to the description of the Bible, was a building oriented to the east direction. The building must have had an interior length of approximately 27 meters, 9 meters wide, and a height of also 3.5. Since I am a more visual person, I purchased a Solomon Temple model that helped me understand better its distribution, since in some rituals, the symbolism of the columns, number of steps on each stairs, chambers, and their location are part of the initiatic journey. Throughout the video, I might come back to this. And by the way, I found this model on a Christian bookstore, so never disregard a place. You never know what you might find there. And by the way, yes, I have a Doctor Strange figure, 3.75 inch, and an Ark of a Covenant. So back to the temple. The temple dimensions were comparable of those of a chapel, but the cult usually took place from the outside, or either side of the entrance of the temple, were erected two columns called Hakim and Boaz. The priests and kings entered the temple through a large gold-plated gate approximately of 10 meters high and 4 meters wide. Behind that door were 3 enclosures. The first of these enclosures was called Hegal, or Santu, holy place of the sanctuary, which was illuminated through high windows. The third chamber, named David or Kodesh HaKodashim, was the holy side of the Temple of Solomon. In Latin, it is known as the Sanctum Sanctorum. The enclosure was a high level than the Hegal and only could be accessed by a climbing ladder. The David was shaped like a cube of approximately 10 meters, and in its center was the Ark of the Covenant. The large chest, made of acacia wood, covered with gold plates and with 4 rings to the corners, where eventually they put rods to transport it. Much has been written about Solomon's temple and little is really known about it. But we know that there were several temples in Israel. The first was the one and only built by King Solomon 3,000 years ago. The next one never existed in stone, was seen by the prophet Ezekiel in a vision. The third was built by King Zerubbabel in the early 6th century BC, after the Jews returned from their Babylonian captivity. And the last temple was erected by Herodes in the time of Jesus Christ and destroyed by the Romans. As Solomon pursued the task of creating great constructions, including a temple to house God, from this temple built by Solomon there are no architectural or archaeological records, so it is understood by most that it is a symbolic temple. However, J.R. Clark, in his book A New Look at King Solomon Temple and its connection with Masonic ritual, and other experts such as Christopher Knight and Robert Lomas consider his style, size, and arrangement that are almost a carbon copy of the Sumerian temple erected for the god Ninurta 1,000 years earlier. But who was Ninurta? According to Zecharia Sitchin on his book The 12th Planet, he was the son and legal successor of Enlil, youngest of the gods on earth, who had been born in the heavens. Ninurta's old depictions show him holding a unique weapon. No doubt he could fire rays of light. Ancient texts hailed him as a powerful hunter, a fighting god, famous for his martial arts. Regarding the temple of Ninurta about 2 millennia earlier, when the Sumerian ruler Gudea commemorated the construction of the temple of his god, said that Ninurta, he wrote, was a man who came from heaven and appeared to him. And because he had a helmet on his head, he was a god. When Ninurta and 2 divine companions appeared to Gudea, they stood next to Ninurta's black bird of the divine wing. In the end, it turned out that the main purpose of the construction of the temple was to provide a safe zone or a special enclosure within the temple grounds for his divine bird. Gudea recounted that for the construction of the enclosure, he received divine help, since huge beams and gigantic stones were brought from far away and were needed, and the construction of the temple was terminated only after the divine bird entered the enclosure. The similarities between biblical and Sumerian descriptions of both vehicles and beings are obvious. The description of vehicles as a bird, a wind bird, and a whirlwind that could rise to the sky while displaying a glow leaves no doubt that there was some kind of flying machine. Ezekiel, who had the vision of the second temple according to the old text, described seeing a celestial chariot. He lived among the Jewish deportees on the banks of the Kabul River in the northern Mesopotamia. What Ezekiel saw was a human-looking being shrouded in glitter and glare, sitting on a throne resting on a metal firmament inside a carriage. Recent studies on these biblical descriptions, such as the one from Joseph Blumrich, have concluded that Ezekiel's chariot was a kind of helicopter composed of a 4-axis cockpit, each equipped with rotating wings. But also, according to other Hebrew holy books, the origin of the temple could have an even more hidden and mysterious meaning. It can also be found in books such as the Quran, where they speak of the prophet by his name, known as Sulaiman, on the Islamic religion. In the Talmud, the construction of the temple was attributed to nothing more and nothing less than a demon named Asmodeo, which does not appear to be as evil as a creature as in other books, as it tells stories about his dealings with King Solomon. And Solomon apparently came to catch the demon and force him to build the Temple of Jerusalem. Let's not forget that according to the volume of the sacred law, no sound of hammer or axe or any tool of iron was heard as the structure arose. We must remember that the central purpose of this temple was to be the house of God and to house the Ark of the Covenant. The Ark was located in the Sanctum Sanctorum, the most sacred and holy on the temple. So talking about this artifact for me is an important task. According to Lon Milo Duquette, Freemason, Kabbalist, and head of the Ordo Templi Orientis, in his book Chicken Kabbalah, he makes an analysis of the name of God and the true nature of the Ark. In his book, he tells us how tradition informs us that every year, on the 10th day of Trisi, October 10, the high priest of Israel made 3 trips to the most holy place of the great temple and sprayed the Ark of the Covenant with blood. Around his leg was tied a long braided rope. The other end of the rope was held by friends of the high priest who were stationed outside of the most holy place. On his third visit to the most holy place, as a multitude of faithful stood outside of the temple and made a lot of noise, the high priest laid his hand directly on the ark and uttered the name of the god as the burning deity was revealed in the clouds and lightning above the lid, the chair of mercy. The rope was necessary because from time to time, at the climax of the supreme ceremony, the high priest exploded. After the spectacular departure of the poor man, the Saint of the Holies was filled with so much smoke and fire that it became too dangerous to enter, and the remains of the roasted priest had to be dragged from the chamber by the rope. Next year, a new high priest will have to give him another chance. We should remember that the belligerent people of the Old Testaments were very superstitious. They took their gods into battle with them in the form of statues, animals, or other talismans objects such as meteors. If one side went on to win the battle, their god was considered superior to the god of the losing side. Very often, the first thing the defeated army would do after regrouping was to steal the winner's god and put him to work for them. This happened to the Ark of the Covenant. The Philistines stole the ark, but later returned it when they discovered it kept killing anyone who tried to move it. The ark was a lethal weapon, and the Israelites treated it as such. They kept it wrapped in fabric and leather, and the man who wore it had to wear special clothes and special shoes. The great Temple of Solomon, according to Duquette, appears to have been built not so much as a house of worship, but as a prison for the dangerous and unpredictable ark. The Sanctum Sanctorum, where the ark rested, was built as a containment chamber, a perfect cube, 30 feet long, 30 feet wide, and 30 feet high. The floor, walls, and ceiling were lined with pure gold, with an estimated weight of 45,000 pounds, and riveted in place with golden nails. Sometimes the ark sparked and generated so much smoke that the temple priests were completely driven out of the building and could not fulfill their duties. You don't need to be a scientist to see that a wooden box with a double gold lining and closed with golden slings containing pots with mysterious substance, heavy plates and rods submerged in a liquid skillet was in all likelihood a gigantic and highly unstable battery. The 2 cherubims on the lid served as an anode and a cathode, and a spark of arc, God's burning presence, jumped madly between the tips of the two highly conductive golden wings. Let us remember that viable batteries have been found in Egyptian tombs of this period and before. Another research of the relationship of the Temple and Freemasons shows that the oldest known document of Freemasonry lead us to their origins in Scotland. One of these documents is a manuscript that has an illustration called the Lambert Scroll, which is a copy of the Heavenly Jerusalem from one of the scrolls Geoffrey St. Omer gave to Lambert in the chapel of our Virgin of St. Omer. This image is the tracing board that is used in one of the most solemn degrees of the Masonic ritual, and shows in many details the excavation on the Temple of Herodes in Jerusalem. Recent research has concluded that the famous Rosslyn Chapel located in Scotland, despite the general conception of the majority, was not a Christian chapel, since it was purposely made in seemingly incomplete manner and with a design that shows no similarities to a traditional chapel of this time. According to Christopher Knight and Robert Lomas, from outside Rosslyn is a stone representation of the celestial Jerusalem as described in the Lambert copy, with towers and curved central roofs inside the Rosslyn shrine. The design is a reconstruction of the ruins of the Temple of Jerusalem, decorated with Nazarene and Templar symbolism. In the northeast corner, they found a section of the wall carved with the towers of celestial Jerusalem, complete with Masonic compasses and the exact style shown on the Lambert Scroll. As mentioned, there is little historical data to sustain the existence of this temple, so I believe that its purpose is mainly symbolic, as well as much of what we found in the Torah and other holy books and orders. But however, I don't want to ignore their relationship and probable origin going back to Sumeria and a deity no less than Ninurta. Maybe, and just maybe, the reason why King Solomon initiated and magical traditions is so important is because it hides a true meaning that describes the true nature of God, the origin of humans, and who knows, maybe the ark was an artifact used by humans to communicate with an actual deity living far in the heavens, and orders like the Freemasons are guardians of this secret. Rosh Ha or Head of the Year, is the Jewish New Year, which is commemorated by the majority of Jews wherever they are, the first and second day of Tishrei, the seventh month of the Jewish calendar, which this year 2020 is 5780. In the ritual of Freemasonry, the pure Hebrew calendar is the one that is used, calling the date we use commonly as Bulgar Era, pointing out its importance in the order. The year starts between September and October, and its number is the result of adding 3,760 to the Bulgar Era year. So for example, for the year 2000, we add 3,760 and we get 5,760. The names of the months are designated by their Hebrew names as in the York Rite. For the beginning of the Hebrew year, there are two criteria according to the Torah. The month of Nisan, around March, April, is the first month of the year, in which the first day, the new year, is commemorated. But for the rabbis, God has established the beginning of man's creation on the Hebrew month of Tishrei, between September and October, when Rosh Ha Shana is celebrated, which commemorates the day when God created the world according to Rabbi Elsa ben Shammua. That is the date of the Feast of the Trumpets, or Teruah, commemorated with trumpets as established in Leviticus 23 24. Rosh Ha Shana, beginning of the year, together with Yom Kippur, Day of Forgiveness, form in Jewish tradition a unity called Yanim Noraim, or terrible days, and are considered a time when God judges the world and will determine what will happen throughout the year. The first of Tishrei is not only the first day of the year, but is the head, as the head commands the rest of the body. In the same way, in this day, it will predestinate everything that will occur during the year. In regards to the Hebrew calendar, in its wide conception, is considered both solar and lunar, and it's very curious that the Hebrew calendar resembles the Chinese, without any clue showing these cultures had any interactions or influence on each other. Also is similar to the calendar used by the people on the Arabic Peninsula until the appearance of Islam in the 7th century. On the other hand, it refers to the Gregorian calendar of universal use based exclusively on the annual solar cycle, and also on the calendar of the Muslim, which is based on the moon. Now, we know that for Freemasons within its rituals, there is a great influence of Judaism, mainly since most of their most sublime and important words are in Hebrew. Therefore, we believe this calendar is no exception and has a great influence in this order. A day in the rabbinic Hebrew calendar runs from sunset, the start of the evening, to the next sunset. This differs from the Gregorian calendar, which runs exactly from midnight to midnight. This calls my attention very much because, according to the Scottish ritual, the beginning of work in Masonic Lodge is also based on the sun, and this can be seen in the ritual when the Right Worshipful Master asks the Worshipful Union Warden his role, and he answers, to mark the sun at its meridian, to call the brethren from labor to refreshment, and from refreshment to labor again. Then the Right Worshipful Master asks the same question to the Worshipful Senior Warden, and he answers, to mark the setting sun and to close the lodge by command of the Right Worshipful Master. Also, when the Right Worshipful Master asks the role of the immediate past master, he answers, as the sun rises in the east to open and enliven the bright and glorious day, so is it the Right Worshipful Master place in the east to open his lodge. The day of work within the lodge is very similar to the Jewish day, symbolically speaking, as they are working a full Hebrew day. The Jews began counting the hours from sunrise, so if it's 6 a.m. for us, for example, then 9 a.m. would be the third hour, and 3 p.m. the 9th. So from there we start seeing a pattern and see the importance of the sun, that again, in Freemasonry, is represented by the position of the Right Worshipful Master sitting in the east of the lodge. Many believe these traditions were an heritage from the Egyptians, whose priests, kings, and pharaohs always practiced their main rituals at noon, when the sun was above their heads and at its maximum and highest point, and always went to bed in fear that Horus will lose its fight against Apophis, and the next day they will wake up in complete darkness. Another fact that points to the importance of the sun is the flaming or racing star represented by Venus. As we know, Venus is not a star, but it looked like one, and could be seen right before the sun came up, and was the messenger of light, the five-pointed star important for many traditions and the order. Many researchers suggest these traditions came from Egypt, passed to the Jewish people, carried by Moses, who was knowledgeable of these secrets, and the Hebrew people, after Jerusalem was destroyed in the year 70, left this knowledge to be rescued by the Templars, who knew of this information, and after they were pursued and their order destroyed, transmitted this knowledge through Freemasonry. From this topic we can find more examples of this transmitted knowledge other than this simple analogy. But just to add another fact, Jerusalem, and especially the place where the Temple of Solomon was, currently on its foundations are located blocks that preceded the Temple of Herod and weighed between 500 to 700 tons, and it's very difficult to find technology that could lift such weight. But there is another place where the same blocks were found in Baalbek, Lebanon, and that might explain why Jerusalem is such an important place for many people and religions, and holds a deeper meaning and the key to respond many things. Let's remember that Prophet Muhammad was not taken to heaven from the place he was. He first had to go to Jerusalem, to the place where the temple was located, and from there he was taken to heaven. Curious, isn't it? There is an explanation for all of this, but I leave you, if you're interested in this deeper meaning, to investigate. I'm gonna leave also some videos at the end if you want to research more. The influence of these Jewish traditions are very clear, as we just mentioned. I finished this work only with the objective of sharing some light of the significance of this festivity, and even though for many Freemasons are just another day, should be of great importance for the order, even though it's not supposed to be dogmatic or religious. It has a great influence from the Jewish traditions that cannot be denied, and are part, in some way or another, on the work within the lodges. According to the Merriam-Webster Dictionary, one of the definitions of a symbol is an object or act representing something in the unconscious mind that has been repressed. A symbol can be composed of an object, with or without a shape, with many details, very complex, as well as simple. Perhaps with colors or not, but still able to transmit a message through its image, which wakes up within ourselves a certain feeling or emotion. Images are a strong force. It's not casual that people say that one image speaks louder than words. A word can be clearly defined, but a symbol cannot. For some, a symbol can mean something completely different compared to others. Symbols are powerful, images that speak to our unconscious mind. The reason why images and symbols are so important is because the spiritual world communicates through images and symbols. When we dream, most of the time when we remember something after we wake up, usually are images, messages from either our spiritual guide or ourselves. When people who allege to communicate with spirits, psychics, or mediums establish contact to a spiritual being, most of the time are able to communicate through images. So these symbols and images are the doors to the spiritual world and to ourselves. All cultures were aware of this. Even the most antique forms of languages started and developed from symbols, representing things, and later became words. And other antique cultures decided to remain communicating through symbols. But is there a way that we can use images to understand what's inside our mind and to discover these hidden aspects that we have within ourselves that we don't even know? Well, there is a resource that is being used by doctors to allow them to uncover aspects of the unconscious mind. And those tests are the Rosh Ha test. This test uses the interpretation of ambiguous designs to assess an individual's personality, which is an idea that goes back to Leonardo da Vinci and Botticelli. The Rosh Ha test is a psychological test in which subjects' perceptions are recorded and then analyzed using psychological interpretation. Some psychologists use this test to examine a person's personality characteristics and emotional functioning. It has been employed to detect underlying disorders, especially in cases where patients are reluctant to describe their thinking process openly. The test is named after its creator, Swiss psychologist Hermann Rosh. The administrator and subject typically sit next to each other at a table, with the administrator slightly behind the subject. In other words, side by side, which mitigates the possibility that the examiner will accidentally influence the subject's responses. Another leading doctor who studied the influence of images was Carl Jung, who was a Swiss psychiatrist. He created some of the best-known psychological concepts, including synchronicity, archetypal phenomenon, and the collective unconscious. Carl Jung archetypes are defined as universal, archaic symbols and images that derive from the collective unconscious, as proposed by Carl Jung. They are the psychic counterpart of instinct. That is to say, they are a kind of innate, unspecific knowledge from the sum total of human history, which prefigures and directs conscious behavior. According to Jung, the human collective unconscious is populated by instincts as well as by archetypes, universal symbols such as the Great Mother, the wise old man, the shadow, the tower, water, and the tree of life. Jung considered the collective unconscious to underpin and surround the unconscious mind, distinguishing it from the personal unconscious. So on one hand, we have a test that psychologists uses to find out through images what really is going inside someone's head, so to speak. And in the other hand, we have archetypes that are universal and are part of the collective unconscious mind. Either way, images and everything that this implies have a strong influence in our mind and in our personality. It makes sense that all traditions in their search for illumination use mandalas as tools to enlighten and allow the mind to move forward using their images, colors, and shapes as part of their meditation process. Also, the use of colors, whether they are dark or more clear, to evocate a certain emotion within ourselves, which we can clearly see when visiting hospitals, clinics, or visiting nightclubs. The whole concepts take us deeply into the discussion of symbolism. But to understand this process and its importance, we need to go in depth into how our mind works. As mentioned before, psychologists were able to identify within our mind hidden aspects that are not usually disclosed and accessible by us or anyone. Psychoanalysis was able to get in touch to these underneath aspects of ourselves by studying techniques like hypnosis and suggestion, and other mystical strings of thought or occult schools define this state to access it as gnosis, the Greek word for knowledge. This unconscious mind, the source of divine magic. In Freemasonry, for example, all their rituals are based on symbols that are placed in specific parts of either initiations and other ceremony rituals to both evocate and be internalized by the initiate during this journey. Part of the work of the Freemasons is to study the symbolism of the ritual and do their own interpretation of each symbol. In other orders like the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, the adepts were asked to draw and paint each card of the tarot deck to make sure they internalize the symbolism of each. Ceremonial magicians use magical weapons with colors and symbols of each element on their rituals, since they have a direct effect on the mind while used during the magical operation. What is Freemasonry? What is it? Freemasonry is a beautiful system of morality, veiled in allegory and illustrated by symbols. What's true behind what people say that whatever takes place inside a temple is a secret? Well, that's not really true. I actually bought 2 books on a bookstore at Borders back in the day with the Science Ducars secret words, as well as online you can find information about the rituals, details of the ceremony, description of the position of the officials in the lodge, etc. So what makes the order so different from other organizations, where you also do an obligation, share a huge bond with the members, and aim to make individuals a better man? Well, my friends, that's the precise secret of Freemasonry, and that consists on their system based on symbols. Through the interpretation and meditation on the Masonic symbols, we can know ourselves like the Rorschach test do, connect to the collective consciousness like Jung said, and be in touch with the spiritual work like we do when we dream. The Masonic secret cannot be found in any book or online, not even by memorizing all the existing writings or rituals about the order, because only the internal work, meditation, deeply and individual on the symbolism can help you find such a secret. There is a Masonic secret. There is, and it's so secret that for each person is different. So different and unique that is personal. The Acacia, the initiation key and the secret of the gods. Before we start with the video, please remember to subscribe, like, and share this video. Thank you for supporting this channel. As always, I'm gonna leave in the description links with the source of the information I'm using, so you can go ahead and do your own research. Perhaps in order to find the answers to many questions, we must carefully explore the beliefs and customs of ancient occult groups or ancient civilizations. For that purpose, we'll perform an exercise and explore the background of a symbol that may represent and symbolize more than we see with a naked eye. The Acacia is a tree or bush that has a very transcendental symbolism within Freemasonry. It has an important prominence within the ritual, both on the recognition and at their most important moments within their rituals, around an iconic figure. The tree is not only important for Freemasons, but for many years it has been important for ancient civilizations such as Egyptians, Sumerians, and of course the Hebrews. And since it is undeniable that the ritual of Freemasons borrows a lot from the Jewish traditions, as I mentioned in other videos, it's important to analyze this tree within the context of the Hebrew traditions. And what better starting point than the Old Testament, the Torah, or Torah. For the Hebrews, the Acacia, or Shita, is mentioned in the Old Testament as it was the protagonist in the construction of the most sacred element for them. The wood of the Acacia is the one selected by God to build the Ark of the Covenant. It is clear to understand why for the Hebrews Acacia was considered sacred, but for the Masonic order it is also sacred according to Oswald Wirth. Knowing the Acacia is possessing the initial notion leading to the discovery of the secret of mastery. To assimilate this secret, the initiate must bring the dead wisdom to him. Similarly, well-known writers of Freemasonry such as Albert Gallatin Mackey, Bernard E. Jones, Jules Boucher, Aldo Lavagini, and René Guénon have made known in their books their opinion of the relationship of this tree, not only for its characteristics to build, but to provide enlightenment and bring the individual some knowledge that provides a revelation for man. It will be that these plants hide some other properties that we do not know, but that can be explored just by carefully reading the passages of ancient texts and cultures we believe closely linked to that source to knowledge and that contact with God. Some believe that the burning bush with which Moses communicated with God was an acacia in the Negev desert, Exodus 3:2. The bark roots and resin, Arabic gum, were used for incense, and their smoke served to keep demons and ghosts at a distance. And certain varieties of acacia are known to produce Arabic gum. Now the name Sarsa, Sene in Hebrew, origin of the place name Sinai, Robus in Latin of the Vulgata, is a vulgar botanical term that can designate many spiny plants of bushy carving, and has been proposed to be identification with different plants, for example, blackberry Rubus fructiferus, and those of genus of Acacia, Shittim in Hebrew, and contain psychoactive substances such as tryptamine or dimethyltryptamine, better known as DMT. Many researchers, due to the topography of the area, mention that this sarsa to which Moses found himself on fire and has his revelation was a type of acacia, since there are several types growing in Egypt and Palestine, the most common being the Acacia seyal. According to the Hedge Mason blog, this tree is still considered sacred in the Middle East, and anyone who breaks a twig is said to be dead within a year. It has even been suggested by the scholar Benny Shannon, professor of psychology at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, Israel, whose main focus of research are human consciousness and the philosophy of psychology, is currently working on a book devoted to a general psychological theory of human consciousness, and says that Moses composed a compound similar to ayahuasca, resin of acacia and Syrian roots, which allow him to see the visions of Yahweh in the burning bush. But what is DMT, or compound found in acacia or ayahuasca? Known as the spiritual molecule or molecule of God, according to some scientists, DMT is secreted by the brain in a near-death experience, and although a very small amount is consumed, produces very intense and elaborate hallucinations. According to Rick Strassman, author of the book DMT, the spirit molecule, during his time at the University of New Mexico, he administered more than 400 doses to 60 volunteers and recorded and studied the effect of the drug. According to the theory, this molecule is segregated by the pineal gland, a small organ located in the center of the brain, and according to the consumers, there's hallucinations of great intensity and elaborations, which includes visions and communications with unknown beings, aliens, other planes or gods, futuristic machinery, and cities or mental expansion. The uses of substances in rituals and ceremonies is nothing new. In the Americas, Greece, and Egypt, they are used to bring the mind to a high and transcendental level of consciousness, as well known to researchers. Geologist Seal Selinga discovered a limestone fracture by two hidden faults across exactly under the ruined Greek temple, creating a path by which chemical fumes rise to the surface to induce visions to the Greek oracle. Dr. Svetla Balanova found traces of nicotine and cocaine on ancient Egyptian mummies. Let's not forget about shamans in native tribes in America. Some authors like Christopher Knight and Robert Lomas say that the ritual for Freemasons that refers to the lost secrets of the Grand Master Builder of Temple of Solomon come from the ritual that originates from ancient Egypt and alludes to the lost knowledge of the original rituals performed by the Egyptian king, where they were transformed into deities, where included some uses of substances that altered their mental state so that they could transcend and communicate with the gods in space. Now the focus of this video is to explore a very transcendental symbol and its relationship with the Hebrew tradition when Moses contacts God, and the path that we are currently evaluating. Aware believing we know about the state of consciousness and substances of natural origin to reach high states of consciousness, either to be adored to help us communicate with the divine beings as something or transform us. Perhaps the result could be unexpected and not written, because what we may find in the other side is something repressed, and we can maybe carry inside that could be liberating or enslave us.